All right, it's time to dive into React. I'm going to be spending a little bit of time each video covering what's under the hood of React. That way you'll be able to see that it's not magic, it's just JavaScript. So where are we going to start? We're going to start with Hello World. So let's just break down what's on the page. And we've got a little bit of extra stuff. This isn't necessary stuff for this example, but this is stuff that is making it nice and quick and easy. But we'll just show you what's essential. We have this statement here, import React from React. And we need this because we need our JSX to be in the scope of React. That just means that when the code here is run, it's going to recognize what is JSX, and it's going to transform it and not throw an error. Because if just plain old JavaScript ran this, it would obviously be an error. So, what is it being transformed into if it's being transformed? Well, just like HTML elements are nodes on the DOM, React elements are nodes in the virtual DOM. So to make a React element, we're going to call createElement. And createElement is a function inside the React library. So we're just going to type React createElement. And this is a function that takes 3 arguments. It takes the name of the element that you want to create. It takes an object that contains any of the properties. And a property, for example, would be something like class name, which is, we could say, which is class in JavaScript. So actually, I think it would be class. Let's just try it out. Greeting. And then we're going to have the text that we want in between. And we want hello world. So let's see what happens. We have a function here called React createElement, and it takes in 3 arguments. So to make my example work, I think we have to have that enabled. And we're going to give the page a reload here, and you'll see we have hello world with the exclamation point. And then let's go down here and remove the exclamation point. You can see it goes away. Awesome. So you can see what's happening here is when you write out the JSX, React recognizes that it's JSX and turns it into this. And let's just see if our class correctly got attached there. So we'll open up our little inspector, and then we'll take a look here at our h1, and it looks like it didn't. So that means we could try class name, and then if we reloaded it and took a look at our div, we would see that we have a class now called greeting. Actually, you probably can't see that because it's so small. We would see that we have a class called greeting. So you have to use the same JSX special class names. All right, so now that we know how to do that, that means we don't have to ever look at this thing again. We don't have to ever look at createElement again because it's not nice to look at this. It's not easy, and we want things to be easy, and we want them to be easy to understand so that when we write a lot of code, it becomes clear. So we're just going to get our hello world come back. And you can see that JSX is just a tool to help you. That's all it is. Now the other part of this hello world is the render function. Now React calls the render function the plumbing that connects to the world outside React. And you can see it's a function that takes in 2 arguments. And first off, it's a function that comes from the React DOM library. So pretty plainly, this is a library which lets React interact with HTML, with your index.html. So that it only has one function inside this library, and the one function is render. And render takes in 2 arguments. And the first argument is all of your React components, or all of your React elements. It's your entire, basically it's the entire virtual DOM is the first component. The second component is where you want it to, the second argument is where you want it to go. So this is just plain JavaScript, getElementById app. And so we have in our index.html we just have a div here that has the app ID. And that means that when this runs, it's just going to squeeze it right on into the app div. All right, so now we see how the render function works. Let's talk a little bit about making components. A component is a piece of code, and it allows you to do something called composition. Whenever you stick a div inside of another div, you're doing composition. You're putting something inside something. And basically, it just means that you can wrap new elements around existing ones, or vice versa. Composition and componentifying, or whatever you want to call it, modularizing your code, makes it very easy to understand what's going on inside of an application. So before we continue on to looking at how we make components, there's going to be a little disclaimer, and that's that I'm using ECMAScript 2015, ES 2015, ES6, whatever you want to call it. It's the new standard of JavaScript. So to follow along this tutorial, you'll need to compile whatever is written here into vanilla JavaScript, but I've covered that in a Webpack tutorial. I'm teaching it to you this way because you'll see everyone doing it like this, first off. Even the React docs include examples like this, and it will help you in the future, okay? So that is just to say, there are many different ways to do what I'm about to show you, but I believe what I'm going to show you is the best way, the most accepted way, and the way that will be used in the future. That is used currently and will continue to be used in the future. So just so you understand what's going on and if you see things done differently elsewhere. So there are two types of components. Let's start off with the easiest one. That's called a functional component. But first off, let's put it somewhere else, because we want to work on a little project in the coming episodes. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a component called app. And what is app? Well, it's an element that I'm importing from somewhere else. So I don't really think it exists yet. Yeah, it's just an empty file, so it's probably throwing an error. And let's make a certain component, which is called a functional component. So the first thing we have to do, just like our other little snippet of code, we've got to import React so that when we write JSX, it's in the scope. Okay, so let's write a functional component. Watch closely. Function list returns h1 hello world. And then what we're going to do is we're going to export this function. That's just export default list. That way it can get imported in here and then it can get rendered there. So if we reload the page, we see hello world. That's because we wrote it right here. And to show you that's what we wrote, we can even include some exclamation marks and you'll see them appear. Okay, so a functional component is just a function that returns some JSX. That's it. It's just a function that returns JSX. So say we wanted to make more than one line of JSX. Because if I went along and did a div here, and then I hit enter, and then I put this HTML inside here, whoa, it just stole the HTML right out of there, right? Oh wow, I totally thought that would throw an error. Well, normally how it works is that you want to return your HTML inside of a parentheses. And the reason for that is because in class components, at least, it's what allows you to write multiple lines of JSX. Now, what if we tried to do something like this? What if we did two root divs? It would say a nice error here which says adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So that means you really have to think about what this function is trying to do. And it goes back to what we showed in the beginning about how when you run something like this, all that's happening is it's running that function react.createElement, okay, that took in the 3 parameters. That's all that this function is doing. But React create element can only create one element at a time. So if we pass 2 divs on the same level, it won't be able to do that. So we can only pass 1. And it's usually a pretty good rule that whenever you're writing a component, that is so big that it needs two things of the same level, and you probably just need to split it into two components. Okay, so that is a functional component, and that is how you do multi-line JSX. So the next thing we're going to look at is class components. And let's just create a new file, and we're going to call this file input.js. Okay, so a class component is a little bit different than a functional component, but we still want to use JSX, but we're going to import something else from React here. We're going to import React and component from React. Now, this, what it does is it gives us access to this. Importing React like this gives us access to everything in the React library. Importing component inside of these curly brackets allows us to get the specific part of the React library called component. We want both of them because this component here is going to let us create a new component, a new class component, and the React here is going to let us write JSX. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to write class input extends component. Okay, and this component is being grabbed from peer, and class and extends are special words inside of JavaScript, and we're naming it input. Now, class component gives you access to a lot of React's rich lifestyle methods, and I'll be covering all of these later. So you can't just return some JSX inside of a class component. You have to write a render function, and a render function is just a regular function, and inside this function you can return some JSX. And just to show you that that's true, we're just going to write our input, and then we're just going to do the same. We're going to export our default, our input, and so that way we can access it in other places. And let's access it in our app. So we want to get it right here, and it was called input, so we just call it that, and then we're going to import it up here, import input from input. That should be good. And you can see it popped up right here. And now we can just type things in here just fine, just like a regular input. So now you've seen, very basically, into two types of components. A function component, which just returns some JSX, and a class component, which has a render function that returns some JSX.